They say there's only two things in life that are for sure. This out the way so we don't fall over it later. You know what they are, right? Yeah, but you don't have to pay taxes. You can die in jail. If you don't. The one thing we do know is that we're going to die. None of us believe that at any moment during our life, but other than Elisha going up in the whirlwind or the tornado, which probably didn't do him any good either, everybody else did. So, you know, the chances of beating it are, at least in the mortal sense, pretty slim. Other than that, everything else is kind of up for grabs. Every time something happens, like Newtown, like Aurora, like sinkholes that swallow people in their beds, that must have been horrible. We always wonder, how many bad things happen to good people? I mean, certainly those children in Newtown were, you know, not being punished for anything. Why do these things happen? It's an age-old question, by the way. If you've read Job, that's the question. And that's ancient literature. This has been a struggle for humans, our whole existence. So I'm going to answer it today. Well, I'm going to offer an answer. I wish I knew the answer. Someday I'm going to ask. Excuse me? But lately, different people I've been reading have helped me understand that maybe it's my fault. Well, not mine personally, but it's our fault, but not ours personally. But the fact that we have free will to make choices. Christians are widely divided in how they understand the relationship between God and man. On one end of the scale, God is way up here, and man is humans are way down here, and never between should except through grace. And pretty much God decides exactly what's going to happen before it ever happens, and your life is totally under His will and control. That's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is that, you know, God's not quite that directive, and we have a little more say. And Methodists tend to be more in this realm, in that the decisions we make may or may not be part of God's will. The difference, my dad was raised in the Dutch Reformed Church, which is pretty much like this. He always tells the story of two Dutchmen sitting on the front porch of their neighbor's house across the street's burning down, and the one says, "You think we should call the fire department?" The other says, "No, it's God's will." See, that's kind of that attitude, you know. In fact, this is not a joke, but my dad kind of broke with that theology at some level as a small elementary age child, when one of his classmates was run over by a truck, and he went home and told Grandpa, and his dad, my grandpa, and Grandpa said, "Well, God does that to teach kids not to run into the street." And that was fine with him. Wasn't fine with my dad. That wasn't the kind of God he wanted to even have anything to do with. Yeah, I understand that. But So theologically, we're all over the map. And being a Methodist, I'm more here where it's a relational thing. And I understand God to be more like our parent. And yes, I know the future for my daughter. I mean, she's going to grow up and go to school and go to college and get married and have kids or a career. And I don't know that, but that's the plan. I think God has a plan for each one of us the same way. And the choices we make along the way determine whether or not we follow that plan. Just like the choices our kids make. We want them to go to college and have a good job, but they might choose to, go get, associated with,
Form a rock band.
Or from a rock band, or, worse. Yeah. Sometimes they don't follow our plans. Guess what? Sometimes I don't think we follow God's plan either. And when people don't follow God's plan, bad things happen. And unfortunately, good people get in the way. When we don't provide for mental health for people, when we don't even give people anywhere near the kind of mental health help that we do physical health. Any professional will tell you that. And then we wonder why they go, off their noodle and shoot people. Well, because we're not helping. That's our choice. That's our choice through our tax dollars. That's our choice through how we stigmatize mental health. And then we wonder why bad things happen. Well, we're responsible for that. It's because of the choices we make. Now, see, that's the hard part about this. It's the nice thing about blaming everything on God is it's not my fault. I don't have to take any responsibility for it. But if we think that maybe free will means that we have a say in what happens, and it's not all God's doing, well, then we do have responsibility. Because it's not about fate. We can get lost in fate, and all those things are going to happen. I mean, some people really get lost in fate, astrology, and, who knows what all. But even Christians get lost in faith. We think that, well, we really can't make a difference. What we decide doesn't make any difference, either in our lives or anyone else. What's going to happen is going to happen. And if we think that way, then we're lost. If we believe that in faith, if we ask God for help to make decisions, I don't know about you, do you pray before you make a decision or afterward when it got messed up? Yeah, me too. God has a way, though, because God's like a parent that just doesn't give up. In 1976, I got so thoroughly frustrated and angry and with the church that I left for 10 years. In 1986, I was looking for love in all the wrong places, and a little Jewish guy that I worked with, little Mikey, who was in his 80s and still selling clothes, said, "You should go to church and find a good girl." So I did. I went to the biggest church I could find in Orlando, and I happened to walk in on the day that they were starting their singles ministry, and the director came up to me and talked with me a little bit, found out who I was, my background and all that, and she says, "Would you like to help us put it together?" And 3 years later, I was in seminary. God has a way of, yeah, gotcha, because I knew, I was called in 1970, the ministry, but I ran, like Jonah, not me, I don't want to do that. But, and I thought I was deciding something else, but I really wasn't. That was a choice I made. To go there. I went there for the wrong reasons, but it didn't matter to God. Gotcha. The choices we make matter. They matter to us, and they matter to those around us. We have to walk in faith that the choices we make are the right ones. It's probably a good practice to pray first. You know, if God has something for us to do, it might be good to ask what it is before we go do it. Does that make sense? I'm trying to practice that, but most of us think we can just do it on our own. If we get in trouble, we'll ask God for help. But, you know, if you start with that, maybe we can get in trouble in the first place, you know. Just a thought. It's hard to do because we're trying to be our own people. But if we can walk in faith, then maybe, you know, when that time comes when we aren't producing fruit, and the gardener comes and says, you know, we ought to just get rid of this tree because it's not producing fruit. You know, the good Lord will say, well, you know, let's give it a little more time. Let's you know, work it and fertilize it and try to help it a little bit, and then we'll see if it produces some fruit. Because we all want to produce fruit for God. And we don't want to get cut down because we're of no worth and no meaning. Walk in faith. The faith that says, I make a difference. The decisions I make matter. We handed out, well, they're supposed to be popsicle sticks. They're a little big for that, so tongue depressors. Either now or later today, write down on there a decision you have to make. Something you have to decide about. Okay? And you can leave it in the basket for prayer. You can keep it with you for prayer. You can bring it back next week. But something you have to make a decision about. And maybe on this one at least, we'll pray before the decision gets made. I'm trying real hard to do that. It's not always easy. Do that? That's your homework assignment this week. Act in faith. And not in faith. Don't get lost there. It does require that we realize that we're responsible for our own actions. I hate that. It's a lot easier to blame it on everyone else, but unfortunately, the Lord doesn't let us do that. Pray with me, man. Lord, decisions make a big difference. You give us free will. We exercise it. We make decisions every day, little ones and big ones, and sometimes it's hard to tell which ones are which. Because sometimes the little ones make more difference in our lives than the big ones. Help us be in an attitude of prayer about the decisions we're making. Maybe ask you what you think to get your advice. Maybe then we might walk the path you give us to walk. A little more